51, pick us 52.
Okay, go ahead.
2 had a compressor stall right motor.
Okay, 1 copy.
Vegas 51 shoehorn.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it looked like the number 2 aircraft had an orange spark on the right side. Couldn't tell if it was a blowout or flame.
Okay, stand by. If you had a compressor stall, we're going to rejoin on him.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Mondays with Mover. I am Mover, CW Lemoine, author of the Spectre series and the Alex Shepard series. If you haven't picked those up, please do leave a review if you liked it. It helps support the channel. Also, FINI Flight will be available May 21st. It's currently available for pre-order in ebook formats. It will be available in paperback on the 21st. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere online. No brick and mortar, but I'll leave the links in the description. Also, the I Am the Sheepdog audiobook is available too if you guys are more into audiobooks and following the Alex Shepard stuff. Hope you guys are having a great week. I know it's been a while since we've had a Mondays with Mover. Been doing more of the Mover mailbag stuff, but it's just been busy. In fact, 2 weeks ago, or a week ago actually, I was out for recurrent training for the airline because I'd been flying MIL for a while. And it's actually pretty relevant because we did emergency procedures, which it's a little different between flying fighters and how we deal with emergencies and kind of the single seat mentality and how you deal with emergencies in the Part 121 airline world and even how you deal with emergencies in general aviation. One of the things I thought of recently was one of the first real emergencies I ever had was flying a Glasair 1RG. Back when I first started flying, I had 175, 200 hours before I even joined the military. And although I was proficient and flying a lot, the training I had in dealing with complex or other emergencies was just non-existent. Most of the stuff you focus on in your private pilot training is engine failure, that I need to put it in a field or on a road or in the water or something, but you don't really focus as much on some of the more complex systems emergencies and knowing those systems as you would in the military or in a structured syllabus. And so the first time I had a real big emergency was landing. I had just been flying with a friend of mine. I was landing in a grass strip that I had the airplane based called AMA. And I thought I had gear down indications, and I got the gear up, go around, go around. So immediately firewall the throttle, go around. The handle was down, there was a little switch, but the gear wasn't. And I had just been complacent and hadn't checked that I had 3 green, which it's just kind of a hard lesson to learn. So I went around and started troubleshooting, and I knew that there was I knew that it was an electric hydraulic pump behind me, and that it's hydraulically held up, and so relieving the pressure would allow it the gear to just free fall, and the nose gear would extend by a spring. And so I got in the book, confirmed that, and then looked and unscrewed the little screw that would relieve the pressure, and couldn't get him down. Could not get a down indication in 3 green. So I went to New Orleans Tower and was contemplating landing in the grass because I didn't want to tear up the airplane, and had an airline guy come over the radio and go, no, take the concrete, you don't want to do that. And it was just as a young pilot, I just didn't get it. It was not something I had trained for. It was not something I practiced for. I was vaguely familiar with it, but it's not something that the startle factor really got me. I went to Lakefront and finally got the tower to confirm that I was my gear was down and locked, which Lakefront is another airport in New Orleans. And using G-forces, got the gear at least extended, but although I couldn't get a down and locked indication, it was 3 green over 3 red, I think, at the time. So I make a really great landing, one of the best of my young career, and as I'm rolling out, the main starts to fold. Well, luckily I had the wherewithal to pull the mixture, cut the engine, and saved a prop strike, although the right main folded up on me and scraped up the right aileron a little bit. So a little fiberglass work, ferried the plane out the next day, and it was all good. But it was a big learning experience for me because I realized I didn't know what I didn't know. So when I got to military flying from day one, it is emergency procedures centric thing. They make you learn systems, and not just, you know, basic understanding. You go in depth to learn how the airplane flies, how the airplane works, how every little system interacts with each other, because when you start applying emergencies and compound emergencies, it's good to know. And so even before you hit the flight line, you start learning what's called boldface. And boldface items are memory items that must be executed verbatim. So what they have you do is they have you write them. And you write them in big block letters, and it has to be exactly correct. Now, as you get in other aircraft, like the F-16 has critical action procedures, CAPS, and in the Navy, you have boldface, but it doesn't have to be verbatim. It just has to be correct. So a lot of guys abbreviate stuff and all that. But for pilot training in the Air Force, you have to do this. And now, granted, some of this might have changed. In one of my last videos, I was told that there's some new procedures in pilot training and how they do it at different bases and stuff. So I apologize if this is outdated, but this is at least how it was when I was there. You do boldface, and the boldface items you memorize even before you even know what they mean, so that when you get to day one on the flight line, you can recite them, and you can recite them verbatim. And because of that, you know the procedures by heart, because these are items that have to be executed, like a fire or how to eject. They have to be executed by memory because you don't have time to get into a checklist. So you show up on day one and you start doing what's called stand-up. And everybody hates stand-up. It sucks. And what stand-up means is you're standing at a table, in front of a table in the middle of the room. Your classmates are sitting at attention around you, and an instructor is at a podium. And he'll give you a scenario. Like you're in the airspace, you're doing a loop, and you get an engine fire light. Lieutenant Lemoine, you have the aircraft. And so you go up there, you bring your checklist, your in-flight guide and stuff, and you place it on the table. And at that point, you have to say basically 4 things. And you have to get that correct before you even do the boldface. You say, "Roger, sir, I have the aircraft. I will maintain aircraft control. I will analyze the situation. I will take the proper action and land as soon as conditions permit." And what that does is it solidifies in your mind the basic things you need to do first. And it kind of calms you down. And it's the same thing in life, just in general. You know, maintain aircraft control, aviate, navigate, communicate, right? So if you're at the top of a loop, I'm going to recover from that loop. So you talk about how because you don't want to be out of control trying to deal with a firelight. You don't want to be 40 degrees nose low, screaming, the ground is rushing to meet you, and you die because you hit the ground while you had a firelight that could have been handled. So it's always important to fly the airplane first, so you have to verbalize that. And if you get that wrong, you'll be told to sit down, which sit down means you're grounded for that morning or whatever, and you're going to get additional training, and it's going to be a bad mark in your grade book. And so it kind of puts consequences, and it adds pressure. And that's the whole point of the exercise, is to get you thinking under pressure, to go through very logical steps so that when it actually happens in the airplane, it's not the first time you're ever thinking about it. You know how to calm yourself down. So maintain aircraft control. Roger, sir, I will roll out from whatever degrees of bank I'm at and set known pitch and power settings and fly level flight. Okay, good. Analyze the situation. So now you look at the cockpit, you look at all the indications you have, master caution, fire lights, engine indications, all the totality of what you have, so that you can understand what the situation is. So you diagnose it. This is the part where you're trying to figure out what's wrong. And so maybe immediately apparent. So I have a fire light. Okay, well, a boldface will apply. So at that point, whatever the aircraft is, T6, T38, you'll recite the boldface, and it has to be verbatim. So you'll recite the whole boldface, and then you will tell the instructor how you apply it. So, for example, fire light, you'd say what the boldface is, and then you would say how you're going to execute it, like in the T38, the throttle idle. Identify which throttle it is, bring it to idle. All right, and then I would look at the fire light. Does the fire light go out? Yes or no. If the fire light does go out, then I would make sure I'm not still on fire. I'll test the fire lights. Does the fire light come on? Well, no. Okay, well, if the fire light doesn't come on when I test the fire lights, that gives me an indication that maybe it burned through the fire loop. So then I'll look for other indications, fever indications. Like, we use a lot of acronyms to help you out. But, I'll look for excessive fuel flow, excessive EGT, vibrations, engine roughness, erratic operation. Any of those things could be indications of fire. Am I trailing smoke? And if the answer is yes, okay, well then I'll go to the second part, which is throttle off. And at that point, you're once again assessing, am I still on fire? So, you have, everybody thinks that single seat fighter pilots, we don't have any cockpit or crew resource management, but we have wingmen. We have flight leads. So at that point, too, you would have knocked off whatever you're doing. If you were a two ship, like if you're a single ship, you're just going to knock it off and identify it in that scenario. But if you're in a fight, so if you're dogfighting or if you're in a war, you're either going to terminate if it's not something that you want the whole war to end, or you're going to knock it off if you want. If it's just you and your flight lead doing dogfighting, you would call a knock it off and then assess the situation. So it's kind of situational dependent. But once you call that knock it off, now you have that other aircraft and the other pilot to help you run the checklist, to help you get, identify whether you're on fire or not. And I'm kind of going back and forth. You're not going to deal with that as much in pilot training until you get to formation stuff, but it does apply in, once you're out and doing in the fighter community. But anyway, so you have all these tools available. So you maintain aircraft control, analyze the situation, take proper action. That's when you're telling them what boldface apply. And then once you're done with the boldface, so the critical items, the stuff that can hurt you, you're getting through that, because if the fire is confirmed at that point, you would eject in the T-38, for example. Once you've run through that, the fire is out. Now you go into the checklist, and this is an F-18 checklist, by the way, not a T-38. But you go through the checklist, and the checklist will step by step walk you through the procedures. And again, with the crew resource, we're single seat mentality, so you're the one ultimately making the decision. But you've got another book reader in the jet next to you. You've got the supervisor of flying in the Air Force side or the ODO on the Navy side, people that you can call back home that can read the book for you, that can coordinate with air traffic control, they can coordinate with fire and rescue and make sure that they can get the weather and give you all the latest information. So you've got a lot of resources that you're expected to use. And, it just comes through training and doing this. And that's the whole point of stand-up, is it kind of gets your mind going and thinking through it. So if you handle it correctly, you'll be told have a seat. And that means you passed, you did a good job. If they tell you to sit down, that means you did something wrong, you said something wrong or whatever. And again, it's a bad grade and you're going to have to get some additional training. So that's stand-up, and throughout you're going to be riding boldface until you can't stand it anymore. I mean, you'll be turning it in for a grade, and you'll do that for T6s, T38s. When you get to your first fighter assignment, like the F-16, you'll get what's called a Form 8 check ride. And at that point, you're going to get an emergency procedures evaluation where they put you in the sim, which, going back, throughout this, stand-up is not the only exposure you're going to have to emergencies. You're going to do it in the simulators. You're going to do it, you're going to talk about emergencies before every brief with the emergency procedure of the day. You're going to have stand-up. So it is reinforced and verbalized and talked about. We talk about, even the ones that are non-boldface, we'll go through and we'll remind each other about it by reading the checklist and going through some stuff. And then monthly, there are scenarios that the IPs will put out that just help you recage and think about how you're going to handle certain things. So the training from day one is always emergency procedure centric. And then when you go to your F-16 or F-22, F-35 or whatever, you'll do your emergency procedures evaluation, which is you go in the sim and you run through all the boldface and apply them and show that, and then you'll get some compound emergencies and just show that you can do it in a simulator. And then if the simulator is not available, they have what's called tabletop, where you'll talk through it with your instructor. From there, you'll do that every 18 months. So you've got a check ride window. You'll have to do an EPE with every check ride. And then you'll have, so that's with your instrument check. So that's just basic qualification in the airplane. And then for your mission check, which is your qualification to, as a wingman, a flight lead, an instructor pilot, whatever, you'll do what's called a mission EPE. And that's more geared towards, it's a missionized emergency procedures evaluation. So the big thing there is, you're at the range, you're dropping bombs, you get a hung bomb and a firelight. So you're going to talk through all that. How am I going to knock it off? How am I going to get out of the fight? How am I going to get home with all this? It's more geared towards the weapons and the systems and you're employing in combat versus just basic emergency procedures. So we're very big on structured training and emergencies. And then once you're done, it's not over there. You'll have monthly Boldface you'll have to write out. You'll have ops limits, operating limits that you'll have to know and memorize for every aircraft you fly. You'll have systems tests you'll have to do for these check rides. So it's a lot of continuing education because it's very important. This is an F-18 check ride or checklist. So you got the emergency procedures in yellow, and then the normal procedures on the back, just a pocket checklist. F-16, they're not that thick. Versus, a 737 checklist, which they don't call it. It's a quick reference handbook, and it's pretty thick. What the airlines are going to now, they're getting away from Boldface because there was a NASA study or something that said that you can't train through startle factor. People won't apply the Boldface. I disagree with that because the military does it all the time, and I've been saved. In the video I've posted before, I was doing a formation takeoff with my flight lead. And I was solo, a UPT student, and we were doing a formation takeoff. I was the wingman. I rotated, took a bird down the right engine, and it had a compressor stall. The engine, basically had a big flame come out the back because the bird fought it out the motor, foreign object debris. And I don't even remember, time compression becomes a real thing when it's happening. And I don't even remember applying the Boldface, but I did. It was just such a... I had practiced it so much, I'd memorized it so much, I was startled. There was a startle factor, they're right, but because I had practiced it so much, I overcame and pushed throttles to max, checked that the flaps were at 60, and then lowered the nose to attain single engine takeoff speed, and then single engine takeoff speed plus 10, got the gear up, and then we got into the checklist and we worked through it together. As a flight. That's real important to me, and I think that's why military training is good, because it's so structured. We're so used to doing Boldface, we're so used to memorizing this stuff that it gives us the baseline to any aircraft we learn. It helps us later on. That's not to say that airline training is bad. You go in the sim, so how do the airlines differ? Well, you get in the simulator, you get the same systems knowledge, although not as in-depth. Like I said, the memory items are gone. Now they use what's called a quick reaction card, which is a card that sits on the dash. And you go in the sim, they focus more on, rejected takeoffs, V1 cuts, engine failure right after takeoff, engine failure, on climb out, and other emergencies, and just basic how you go through the book. Because really, all it is, once you're airborne and it's not an immediate action thing, is just going through the checklist and reading it step by step and making sure that you're applying everything that you need to apply throughout. So the training is still very good. It's just different because you have two people. So you have somebody that can fly the airplane while the other person works the checklist. You have somebody that can talk on the radios while the other person works the checklist. When you're a single seat fighter pilot, even though I talked about we've got resources we can use, you're doing everything. You've got the checklist out, you're flying the airplane, and a lot of these airplanes don't have autopilot, like T-38, T-6, F-16, F-18, F-22, they all do, but you don't have the autopilot, so your task loading is much higher because you're alone and it's just you. You're the one that will live or die by how you appropriately do the procedures. Now, on the Navy side, is it a little bit different? Not really. I mean, they do what's called NATOPS checks, which is just like an EPE. They also, which was a little different than the Air Force, so they do an emergency for every brief, but they also brief what's called departure spin Boldface. That's a big foot stomper when you're going to go do dogfighting in the Navy. So they have someone recite it every time you're going to go fight, versus the Air Force, which it's just whatever the emergency procedure of the day. It's not necessarily out of control flight or anything like that. But again, when I was talking to my captain on the Recurrent the other day, he talked about how he was in an F5 and he put it out of control inadvertently, and using the Boldface saved his life. And so that's why he disagreed also with the whole startle factor and NASA studies, because you can train through startle factor. I mean, it's just part of muscle memory and doing it enough and overcoming. So, but on the airline side, you do your initial qualification training, so a ton of sims, doing the emergency procedures there and going through that and working as a crew. And then you do recurrent training every 9 months. So on the first, what's called R9, at least at my company, your R9, on day one, you'll go into the sim and practice engine failures on takeoff, single engine go around, all that stuff. And then day two, you'll fly a normal flight with one minor emergency and just kind of go through that, and that's a check ride. And then the R18 is the same thing on day one, and then day two is more emergency procedures centric with the check airmen. So that's kind of how it differs. The biggest thing in general for how we deal with emergency procedures, systems knowledge is very important, knowing your systems, because then you can understand what's going on, how, when certain lights come on. When, on my check ride, I had a fuel gauge malfunction. When I did my most recent check ride in the T-38A for my mission check, and it was just, it was a malfunction. We worked together, started coming back home, because fuel emergencies, it's you knock off the fight and come home, because we didn't know if we had a fuel leak or a gauge malfunction. Eventually, after troubleshooting it, we realized, it was a gauge malfunction, but that's just not something we wanted to mess with. And again, I had my flight lead helping me coordinate with air traffic control agencies and stuff like that. And it's just not something, because of all the training you get, it becomes a more routine event versus, if it's the first time you're seeing it, it takes away some of the fear that you might have, because you've seen it before. You've seen it in the simulator. You understand the systems. Okay, I can be calm. I'm going to maintain the aircraft control. Now I'm going to analyze the situation. I'm going to take the proper action and land as soon as conditions permit. So I'm not going to get myself in a hurry. I'm just going to deal with it one step at a time, take a deep breath, and go through it. And if you use that throughout your career, no matter what you fly, it'll help you out. And and like they say, aviate, navigate, then communicate, because communicate's last, because there's nothing anyone on the ground can do to help you. It's up to you to make sure you're flying the plane, make sure you're going the right way, and then you can start telling people about your problem. Because you tell people on the ground your problem, that's great, but you're the one that needs to be dealing with it. That's about it for emergencies. I just wanted to talk about a little bit on how it's different, how it's the same. I know I've had a couple questions about stand-up, and it's just not something to worry about. Yes, it is stressful. Yes, it does suck, but it's just something you're going to get over and have to get through. And it doesn't last forever. It's not something you do once you're in the CAF or the fleet. The Navy side. The Navy doesn't even do stand-up, so. But they will ask you questions in the brief. So it's important to know all that stuff. Good systems knowledge will get you through pilot training. Being able to be there in a check ride, and when they ask you a question, be able to answer it correctly, and not just make up an answer, but correctly, shows that you've been putting the preparation in, shows that you understand, you've been studying stuff, and that makes it so much easier in the airplane later on. So. Anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed it. Mover mailbag will come back in a week or so. I'll be off at training, but thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.